He'd seen men die. He'd seen them die in fields of churned mud. Their names cried out over the roar of cannon fire. He'd seen them die in dusty skirmishes, their last breath a rattling curse under a sun that didn't care. But he'd never seen a man dance on the end of a rope while a crowd cheered. Captain Boone Delaney stood in the shadows, the grim celebration of so-called justice echoing in the street. The man swinging from the old oak had stolen gold. In this god-forsaken corner of the world, that was a death sentence. His fingers, calloused and sure, found the familiar grip of his Colt Navy, a ghost of a habit. The gun had been with him since Gettysburg. It had outlived better men. The sheriff, a man named Wilson with a badge polished brighter than his morals, ambled over. "Not joining the festivities, Captain?" Boone's voice was gravel, worn down by too many orders shouted over the dying. "Seen enough men die to last me 10 lifetimes. Law out here ain't the same as on the battlefield," Wilson offered, a weak excuse for a murder. Boone took a final swig from his flask. The whiskey burned a familiar path down his throat. "Justice and law are two different things, Sheriff." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked away, the cheers of the mob fading behind him. It was time to go home, or what was left of it. The Delaney Ranch was a sprawling ghost, carved from the wilderness by 3 generations of men who were now all in the ground. Boone was the last one left. 6 months. It had been 6 months since he'd stood on this land, burying his father next to his grandfather. The Army called it a Sioux uprising, a neat and tidy story. Boone knew better. He knew stories were never that simple. As he swung down from his horse, the real ghost came out. His grandfather, Ezra, teaching him to read deer tracks in the snow. His father, Jeremiah, showing him how to mend a fence. His wife, Caroline, her smile as bright as the sun, waving from the porch. Their son, William, clutching her dress. Caroline was gone. Smallpox. William, just a boy, was in Boston with his brother, raised to be a gentleman, far from the blood and dust of the frontier, a world away. Boone had sent him away to protect him from the man the war had made him. Jackson, the old ranch hand freed by his grandfather before the war, emerged from the barn. He was the only family Boone had left. "Captain," he said, his voice a low rumble, "been expecting you." "Got delayed," Boone said, the words feeling hollow. Jackson's face, a roadmap of hard years, creased into something like a smile. "She's still standing." "More or less." He took the reins. "Your father's papers are in his study, just as he left them." The words hit Boone like a fist, just as he left them. Before the so-called uprising, he ran a hand through his hair, more gray now than brown. At 32, he felt ancient. The war had stolen his youth. The frontier had stolen his soul. All that was left was a duty to this land, this legacy of ghosts. He climbed the porch steps, pausing to look out over the valley. The town of Silver Creek lay to the west, a festering boom town born from the gold rush. Beyond that, the vast empty lands promised to the Sioux, a promise already broken. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the truth about his father's death was waiting. He just had to be willing to dig it up. Silver Creek had exploded. 2 years ago, it was a handful of shacks. Now, a proper main street, a bank, a hotel. Gold did that. It made things grow fast and rotten. Boone tied his horse outside the general store, his hand instinctively checking his gun belt. In a town like this, you were sized up in a second. Predator or prey. The conversations inside died as he entered. A tall stranger with a military posture and a gun worn low always got attention. A voice boomed from behind the counter. "Well, I'll be damned. Captain Delaney, back from the dead. Colonel Henrik Larson, Confederate." The scar on his face, a souvenir from Shiloh, twisted his smile into a permanent sneer. He'd swapped his gray uniform for an expensive suit, but the man underneath was the same. A killer. "Larson," Boone acknowledged. "Heard you'd settled here." "Settled and thrived, Captain," Larson gloated, gesturing around the store he apparently owned, along with the bank and everything else worth a damn. Amazing what a man can accomplish when he puts the war behind him. The jab was obvious. While Larson built an empire, Boone had been wandering, fighting pointless skirmishes, clinging to the only life he knew. I need supplies for the ranch, Boone said, ignoring the bait. Larson's eyes narrowed. Ah, yes, the Delaney place. Terrible business about your father and grandfather. Savages. He shook his head, a perfect picture of false sympathy. Though their timing was convenient for you, wasn't it? Boone's hand twitched. Meaning what? Just that your inheritance came at an opportune moment. Word is, you'd worn out your welcome with the army after that little incident with the Apache camp. Larson's voice dropped, but it was loud enough for the whole store to hear. 3 women and a child, wasn't it? The memory flashed. A night raid, bad intelligence, screams in the dark. He'd resigned the next day. I need flour, coffee, and ammunition, Boone said, his voice flat. And I need to know who's been running cattle on my South Range. Larson's smile was all teeth. Ah, well, with the property empty, some neighbors may have expanded their grazing. No harm intended, I'm sure. Your cattle, Larson. Land does no good lying fallow, Captain. But now that you're back, I'm sure we can work things out. Amicably. Nothing about Henrik Larson had ever been amicable. Outside, as Jackson loaded the wagon, the whispers started. The stares. Indian fighter. Butcher of women and children. His reputation had arrived before he had. He'd come home to escape his past, but in a town run by his old enemy, the past was just waiting for him with a loaded gun. He had to get off his own land. That was the first insult. The second was that the fence hadn't just fallen into disrepair. It had been cut, deliberately. Boone spent 3 days riding the perimeter, his anger a cold, hard knot in his gut. Larson's cattle were grazing on Delaney land, a bold, open challenge. On the 4th day, he was checking the fence along the creek, the water churning high and fast with spring melt, when he heard it. Gunshots. 3 in quick succession. He spurred his horse, his revolver already in his hand. He rounded a bend and saw them. 3 riders chasing a lone figure on foot. A woman, her dark hair streamed behind her. Apache, bounty hunters, men who made their living from death, collecting government coin for scalps. Hostile or not, it didn't matter. Out here, any Apache was fair game. The woman reached the raging creek and hesitated. A bullet kicking up dirt at her feet made the choice for her. She plunged in. Another shot rang out. Boone saw her stumble, clutching her arm. The current grabbed her instantly, dragging her downstream. She was wounded, exhausted, and drowning. He had seconds to make a choice. Get involved or ride on. With a curse, he fired a warning shot over their heads. That's far enough, he roared, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. The bounty hunters wheeled around, rifles raised. The leader, a man with a rat-like face, lowered his weapon slightly. This ain't your business, mister. We're on official business. Not on my land, you're not, Boone growled, his Colt aimed steady at the man's heart. This creek is my boundary. She's Apache, another one spat. Probably one of them that killed your kin. You're Delaney, ain't you? Boone's eyes flicked to the creek. The woman was losing her grip on a submerged log. She was going under. $500 for her, the leader offered, a greasy smile on his face. Dead or alive, the army pays good for scalps these days. Get off my land, Boone said, his voice colder than the creek water. Now. Something in his eyes told them he wasn't asking. With a string of curses, they turned and rode off. Boone didn't wait. He dismounted and plunged into the frigid water. The current fought him every step of the way. He reached the woman, grabbing her around the waist. Her eyes, dark and fierce, met his. There was no gratitude in them, only defiance. He dragged them both to the muddy bank, his lungs burning. She lay motionless. The bullet had torn a bloody path through her arm. Worse, she wasn't breathing. He rolled her onto her side, pressing hard on her back. Water gushed from her mouth. She convulsed, then took a ragged, gasping breath. Her eyes fluttered open. They were filled with a strange kind of horror. She whispered something in her own tongue, then switched to perfect, unaccented English. You saved the wrong person. And then she passed out. Boone stared down at her, the cryptic words echoing in his ears. He lifted her onto his horse. Whatever she meant, it would have to wait. A storm was rolling in, and he had just declared war on the bounty hunters of the territory by saving an Apache woman on the same land where his father was supposedly killed by her people. Nothing about this made any sense. Her fever broke on the second night. Boone had given her his own bed, sleeping on the couch in his father's study, a room that still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco and old paper. He woke at dawn, his old army habits dying hard, and went to check on her. The room was empty. The bed was made. He found her outside. She was standing at the edge of the yard, perfectly still. She was exactly 30 paces from his front porch. She wore clean clothes Jackson had found, but she had her own moccasins back on, and around her neck was a beaded necklace he'd set aside. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood an old Apache man, lean and weathered, a Winchester rifle cradled in his arms. He wasn't aiming it, but he was ready. Boone stepped onto the porch. He'd left his own rifle inside, a deliberate sign of peace, but his Colt was still on his hip. It was a part of him now. "You're feeling better," he said to the woman. Neither of them moved. The old man's eyes missed nothing. They swept over Boone, the house, the barn, assessing every detail. "My name is Boone Delaney," he tried again. "You're welcome to food and rest before you move on." The old man finally spoke. His English was clear, precise. "I am Joseph Running Bear, medicine man of the Mescalero Apache. This is my daughter, Ayanna." Boone nodded. "Your daughter was hunted, shot. She nearly drowned." "We know what happened," Joseph said. "We have come to settle the debt." "There's no debt," Boone said quickly. "I don't want payment." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed the old man's face. "You misunderstand, Captain Delaney. The debt is not what she owes you. It is what you now owe her." Boone frowned. "I don't follow." "When you save an Apache life," Joseph explained, his voice taking on the rhythm of ancient law, "you become responsible for that life, every obligation, every enemy, every debt that person carries. This is our way." "That makes no sense," Boone shot back. "I help someone in need. That doesn't make me responsible for her entire life." "Yet it does," Joseph countered, his gaze unwavering. "Ayanna will follow you now. She will keep exactly 30 paces between you. Not closer, not farther, until the debt is paid." Boone looked at Ayanna. She hadn't moved a muscle. Her face was a mask, but her eyes were locked on him, intense and unreadable. "And how is this debt paid?" he asked, the words feeling like a trap. "There are two ways," the old man said, and his words sent a chill down Boone's spine. "Either she must save your life in return, or one of you must die." The morning air suddenly felt thin, cold. "That's not going to happen," Boone stated, his voice hard. Joseph just shrugged. "It is not for you to decide. The debt exists, whether you acknowledge it or not. Refuse it, and it only grows heavier." He took a step back, melting toward the trees. "She will not enter your home unless invited. She will not speak unless spoken to. She will simply follow, as is her duty." He paused at the edge of the woods, his final words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "And as is yours to bear the consequences of your choice." Joseph disappeared into the trees, silent as a ghost, leaving Boone standing on his porch, staring at the Apache woman who was now his shadow, his responsibility, his potential executioner. And she just stood there, exactly 30 paces away, watching him with those bottomless dark eyes. The strangest vigil in the world had just begun. For 3 days she was a ghost at the edge of his vision. When he worked in the barn, she waited outside, a silent statue. When he rode the range, she followed on foot, her pace impossibly steady, always maintaining that precise distance. 30 paces. He never saw her eat. He never saw her sleep. But every morning when he woke, she was there, watching. On the fourth day, he rode into Silver Creek. He was determined to ignore her, to pretend this insane situation wasn't happening. But in a town still spooked by Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn, the sight of an Apache woman trailing the new owner of the Delaney Ranch was like throwing a match into a powder keg. The whispers followed him down the street. Indian lover. Traitor. Henrik Larson was waiting for him on the boardwalk outside his bank, a smug look on his scarred face. Ayanna stopped, as always, 30 paces behind Boone. "Making new friends, Captain?" Larson called out, his voice dripping with venom. "She's not bothering anyone," Boone said, turning toward the store. Larson stepped in his way. Perhaps not yet, but folks around here have long memories, especially about what her kind did to your father and grandfather. His voice was low, but loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear every word. I haven't forgotten anything, Larson, Boone shot back, including which side you fought for. Ancient history, Larson waved a dismissive hand. We're all Americans now, which is why it's concerning to see a man like you fraternizing with the enemy. Just then, the store door opened and an old woman stepped out. Eleanor Patterson, the widow of the town's first judge. She was the self-appointed moral compass of Silver Creek, and her eyes missed nothing. Captain Delaney, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. She nodded at Boone, then her gaze drifted past him, landing on Ayanna. Her look wasn't hostile like the others. It was something different, curious, knowing. And I see you've brought company, she said. It's a temporary situation, Boone muttered. The old woman studied Ayanna for a long, silent moment. She has Maria Santos's eyes. The name hit Boone like a stray bullet. Maria Santos, a name from a ghost story his grandfather used to tell. A Mexican housekeeper who had worked on the ranch for years. What did she have to do with any of this? You knew Maria? He asked, surprised. Mrs. Patterson gave a small, cryptic smile. This town has been my home for 30 years, Captain. I knew everyone worth knowing. She glanced pointedly at Larson. You should visit me for tea. We have much to discuss about history. With that, she turned and walked down the boardwalk, leaving Boone standing there with 100 new questions. Larson watched her go, a calculating look in his eyes. Careful with old Eleanor, he warned. She has an appetite for meddling. As Larson walked away, Boone could feel the weight of every eye in town on him. He had an Apache shadow. He had an enemy in the most powerful man in town. And now a name from the past had been resurrected, a name that might just be the key to everything. That night he pulled a weathered trunk from under his bed. Inside, beneath old uniforms and maps, was his grandfather's journal. He'd never read it. It felt too private. But now he had to know. He skimmed through the yellowed pages, searching for her name. He found it. May 15th, 1847. Found a Mexican woman half drowned in the creek today. Her name is Maria Santos. Her husband and child died in the winter. I believe she was trying to join them when the current took her. He kept reading. Ezra had saved her life. She'd stayed on as a housekeeper for 23 years. The last entry about her was from 1870. Maria left today. She said it was time to return to her people. I gave her a silver locket and extra wages. Some debts can never truly be repaid. What debt? What did his grandfather owe a housekeeper he had rescued from a creek? He closed the journal, more confused than ever. A sound from the yard drew his attention. Ayanna was standing in the fading light at her usual distance. But something was different. She had placed something on the ground between them, a single eagle feather. She backed away, her eyes never leaving his. The feather lay in the dust. A silent message. A warning. And he had no idea what it meant. The rumble of hoofbeats woke him at dawn. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and his blood ran cold. Riders, at least 15 of them, with Henrik Larson at their head. They were armed and they were carrying torches. Ayanna was already in the yard, standing exactly 30 paces from the house, right between Boone and the approaching mob. She was watching them, her face calm, as if she'd been expecting them. Jackson! Boone yelled. Shotgun! The old man appeared, the weapon looking like a natural extension of his arms. Ain't good, Captain, he muttered. No, Boone agreed. It isn't. Larson reined in his horse 50 yards out. Delaney, we've come to solve your Apache problem for you. Boone stepped off the porch, moving to stand just in front of Ayanna. This is private property, Larson. You're not welcome here. Larson dismounted, a gleaming new rifle in his hands. That savage is an insult to the memory of your family, after what her kind did. My family is my business, Boone said, his voice ice. You've got 1 hour, Delaney, Larson declared. Get her off your land or we will. And don't think about playing the hero. There are 15 of us, and 2 of you. Before Boone could answer, a third voice cut through the tension. 3. Ayanna had moved. For the first time, she had broken the 30-pace boundary. She now stood at Boone's side, her face resolute. She looked past Boone, her eyes locking onto Larson. Her voice was clear, ringing across the yard, her English perfect. I am not a witch. I am not an enemy. I am a keeper of debts. She took a breath, and her next words hit the crowd like a thunderclap. And I know who really killed Jeremiah Delaney. Her dark eyes stared straight at Henrik Larson, and for just a second, the man's smug mask slipped. And underneath it, Boone saw a flash of something he never expected. Pure, naked fear. The silence in the yard was absolute. Every man in Larson's mob stared, stunned by Ayanna's accusation. Larson's face hardened, the flicker of fear replaced by a cold fury. Watch your tongue, woman, he snarled. Making accusations like that will get you killed. Boone glanced at Ayanna. He didn't know if she was telling the truth, but he knew Larson's reaction wasn't that of an innocent man. He'd hit a nerve, a deep one. This is my land, Boone announced, his voice carrying over the yard. This woman is under my protection. Whatever your grievances, you'll take them up with me. Larson laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Protection? Like you protected those women and children in that Apache camp you wiped out? Your reputation precedes you, Captain. The old wound ached. Boone's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. You've said your piece, Larson. Now take your men and leave, before this turns into something we all regret. For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then a calculating smile spread across Larson's face. Have it your way, Captain, but a man who chooses an Apache over his own kind won't find much welcome in Silver Creek. He gave Boone one last, hateful look. 1 hour, then we'll be back, and we won't be asking. The riders turned and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a promise of violence hanging in the morning air. What did you mean? Boone asked, turning to Ayanna as soon as they were gone. About my father. For the first time, he saw a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. The river speaks many truths, she said cryptically. I will show you, but not now. Jackson came up beside them, his shotgun still held at the ready. They ain't bluffing, Captain. They'll be back. Boone nodded grimly. I know. He looked at Ayanna, this enigmatic woman who had just upended his entire world. Why are you really here? He asked, his voice low. What is this debt? It began before you were born, she said, her gaze drifting toward the house. With water that should have claimed a life, and a man who interfered with fate. Your grandfather's journal holds part of the story. The rest, she looked toward the creek, the rest lies where water meets stone. She took a step back, then another, until she was once again exactly 30 paces away. Her silent vigil had resumed. Boone was left with a head full of questions, a mob on its way, and a promise of a revelation hidden in the memory of the river. He had a ranch to defend, but he was starting to realize he wasn't just fighting for land. He was fighting for the truth, and he had a feeling that truth was going to be more terrible than he could ever imagine. The attack didn't come from the direction of town, it came at dusk from the south. Flaming arrows arced through the twilight, slamming into the dry hay in the barn. Within minutes, the whole structure was a roaring inferno. Boone and Jackson rushed to fight the blaze, a desperate, hopeless battle against the flames. In the chaos, neither of them noticed that Ayanna was gone. Only when the fire was contained, the barn a smoking ruin, did Boone see it. In the spot where she always stood, 30 paces from the house, lay another eagle feather. This one had a small red mark on it. It looked like blood. She warned us, Jackson said, his face streaked with soot. Drew them away. How do you know? Saw her slip into the trees right before they came. One of them spotted her, gave chase. The other set the fire. A distraction. A knot of worry tightened in Boone's gut. If Larson's men caught her, a single rifle shot echoed from the direction of the creek. Then 2 more. Boone was running before the third shot faded, grabbing his Winchester from the porch. He moved through the woods with an instinct born from years of warfare, the moonlight his only guide. He heard voices ahead, angry, arguing. He crept closer, using the sound of the rushing creek to mask his approach. 3 of Larson's men, One of them was clutching a bloody arm. "Clean shot," one was saying. "That Apache witch can shoot." "Shut up," the wounded man growled. "She's still out there, watching us." "Let her watch," the third man said. "Boss said make it look like an Indian attack. We burned the barn. Your arm is all the proof we need now." So it was Larson's men, not a mob. Hired guns. "We should head back," the wounded man whined. "Tell Larson the job's done." "Not quite," the first man said. He wanted the Apache woman gone too. Dead. As they argued, a shadow detached itself from the trees. It was Ayanna. She held a bow, an arrow nocked but not drawn. She was silent, deadly, a predator. She deliberately stepped on a dry twig. The sharp crack made the men whirl around. Guns raised. But she was already gone, a ghost melting back into the darkness. With a string of curses, two of them plunged into the woods after her. They left the wounded man behind. Boone had a choice. Go after Ayanna, or deal with the man who had answers. The choice was made for him. The wounded man turned and looked straight at his hiding spot. "I know you're there, Delaney," he called out, raising his rifle with one hand. "Your Apache friend led my boys on a chase, but I ain't so easily fooled." Boone stepped out from the shadows, his Winchester leveled. "Drop it." The man Ed gave a pained laugh. "Or what? You'll shoot me? Then you'll never know why Larson wants this land so bad." "I can guess," Boone said. "There's gold in the hills." Ed's eyes widened. "Close! But it ain't just any gold. It's on an Apache burial ground. Sacred land. Cursed, they say." His face twisted in pain. "Your father found out. He threatened to go to the feds." A cold dread washed over Boone. "So Larson had him killed." "Not directly," Ed gasped, the story spilling out of him now. "Just made sure some angry Apache warriors knew exactly when and where to find your pa and granddad. Let nature take its course." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with sickening clarity. "Those warriors," Boone said, his voice dangerously low, "they wouldn't happen to have been led by a man named Joseph Running Bear, would they?" Ed's shocked face was all the answer he needed. A shot rang out from deep in the woods, followed by a scream that was cut short. Ed flinched. It was all the opening Boone needed. He lunged, knocking the rifle aside, driving the man to the ground. After a brief struggle, Boone had his knee on the man's chest, the barrel of his Colt pressed to his temple. "Tell me everything," Boone demanded. "Now!" He brought Ed back to the ranch at dawn, unconscious and tied to his own horse. Of the other two men, there was no sign, only a splash of blood on the rocks by the creek. Ayanna was waiting, at her usual distance. Her dress was torn. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, but otherwise she was unharmed. The bow was gone. "We need to talk," Boone said, his voice grim. "About my father, about Larson, and about this game you and your father are playing." For a long moment, she just watched him. Then she nodded and gestured toward the creek. "The river remembers," she said softly. "I will show you." They walked for an hour, Ayanna leading him along a hidden trail. She had finally abandoned the 30-pace rule. She walked just ahead of him, silent and purposeful. She stopped where the creek widened into a deep, quiet pool, sheltered by a cliff of red rock. The entire cliff face was covered in ancient carvings, petroglyphs, spirals, animals, handprints etched into the stone over centuries. And on the sandy bank, a spiral pattern made of stones, an exact match for the shape the eagle feathers had formed. "What is this place?" Boone asked, his voice hushed. "The place of speaking waters," Ayanna said, "where my people come to hear the river's wisdom." She knelt by the stone spiral. "This is where it began, where Maria Santos came to join her dead child in the river." The name again, Maria Santos. "From my grandfather's journal," Boone said. "Your grandfather pulled her from the water when she should have died," Ayanna explained. "He interfered with fate. Maria Santos should have died that day. Her children, her grandchildren, none of us should exist." She looked up at him, her eyes holding a profound, ancient sorrow. "We exist because Ezra Delaney created a debt, the debt of a life that was never meant to be." "And my father?" Boone pressed. "Joseph, did he lead the attack?" "Joseph went to warn him," Ayanna said, a shadow crossing her face. He went to tell him that Henrik Larsson had discovered their plan to protect the sacred hills. What plan? Your father, Jeremiah, had made a secret pact with my father. He discovered Larsson was illegally digging on the burial grounds, looking for gold. Jeremiah agreed to use his influence to protect the land in exchange for my father ensuring peace with the settlers. The truth was more complex, more tangled than he could have imagined. His father wasn't killed in a random uprising. He was killed because he was trying to do the right thing. Why would Larson use Apache warriors to kill him? Boone asked. Because he needed someone to blame, Ayanna said, the pieces falling into place. If settlers were being attacked, the government would send in the army. They would drive the Apache from their treaty lands, and the sacred hills and all their gold would be his for the taking. My father found out. He confronted Larson, and Larson ensured he never had the chance to tell anyone else. Ayanna finished. A rustling in the trees above them made Boone's hand fly to his gun. But Ayanna raised a hand, calm. Father, she called. Joseph Running Bear emerged from the trees. He wore a cavalry officer's saber at his side, and a military medal was pinned to his buckskin shirt. You have told him, Joseph said, his eyes on Boone. She told me everything, Boone confirmed. But I have one question for you. Why did you attack my father if you went to warn him? I did not attack him, Joseph said, his voice heavy with an old pain. But others of my people did. Young warriors filled with anger. Larson fed them lies. He showed them forged documents, a deed with Jeremiah's signature, claiming he had sold the sacred land. By the time I learned the truth and reached the ranch, it was too late. Boone finally understood the betrayal, the manipulation, the layers of lies. How convenient, he said, a new suspicion dawning, that your daughter was being chased by bounty hunters right across my land, almost as if it were planned. A ghost of a smile touched Joseph's lips. The river creates its own paths, Captain. We merely follow where they lead. Before Boone could respond, they heard it, the thunder of hoofbeats coming fast along the creek trail. Larson's men, Ayanna said, her hand going to the knife at her belt. More than before, Joseph added grimly. They found the bodies by the river. Now they come for vengeance. And for me, Boone said, checking the rounds in his Winchester, Larson won't stop until he has this land or my life. Then perhaps, Joseph said, his eyes hardening as he looked at the approaching dust cloud, the time has come to balance the scales, once and for all. Sheriff Wilson stared at the sight on his jailhouse steps. Captain Boone Delaney, standing over the bound form of Ed, one of Larson's hired thugs. Beside him, an Apache woman and an old Apache medicine man, both looking like they were carved from stone. Sheriff, Boone said, his voice calm and steady, this man has a confession you'll want to hear. Wilson approached cautiously. About what, Captain? Arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy in the deaths of my father and grandfather, Boone stated, the words hanging in the morning air, all under the direction of Henrik Larsson. The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. Those are serious accusations against the most powerful man in the county, Captain. I have proof, Boone assured him. Witnesses, documents, enough to hang him. Ed, the wounded man, looked up, his eyes wide with fear. It's true, Sheriff. He's been planning it for years, using the Apache as scapegoats to get at the gold in the sacred hills. Wilson's gaze shifted to Joseph and Ayanna. And their part in this? Joseph Running Bear came to warn my father, Boone explained. He arrived too late. His daughter Ayanna has been helping me uncover the truth. The sheriff rubbed his jaw, clearly overwhelmed. He knew Larson was crooked, but this was a conspiracy that could tear the whole county apart. Bring me what you have, he finally said. I'll review it. Until then, he gestured to Ed, I'll hold this one for questioning. As his deputies dragged Ed inside, Wilson lowered his voice. A word of advice, Captain. Larson has a lot of friends in high places. Tread carefully. Always do, Sheriff, Boone replied. Just then, a commotion at the end of the street made them all turn. A group of riders storming into town. But these weren't the ranchers and townsfolk from before. These were professional gunfighters, hard-eyed killers. And leading them, looking like he owned the world, was Henrik Larsson. Looks like your evidence better come quick, Captain. Wilson muttered, his hand drifting toward his gun. The devil himself just rode into town. Larson reined in his horse, his cold eyes locking onto Boone. The whole street went silent. Shopkeepers ducked inside. Townsfolk scattered. It was a classic Western showdown, right in the middle of Main Street. "Well now," Larson called, his voice booming with false cheerfulness. "Isn't this a touching scene? The noble captain, the brave sheriff, and a couple of savages. I do hope I'm not interrupting." "It's over, Larson," Boone said, stepping forward. "Ed confessed everything." Larson just smiled. He swung down from his horse, walking toward them with a slow, deliberate confidence. The desperate lies of a known drunkard? I don't think so. He turned to the crowd that was now peering from windows and doorways. "Good people of Silver Creek, I have disturbing news. Apache raiding parties are gathering in the hills." A murmur of fear rippled through the onlookers. "And what do we find here?" Larson continued, pointing a dramatic finger at Joseph and Ayana. "Apache spies, infiltrators, conspiring with a man whose loyalty to his own kind is questionable at best." "That's a lie," Boone shouted. "You're the one who manipulated them. You got my father killed to steal their land." For a second, Larson's mask of control slipped. Raw hatred flashed in his eyes. "Who will they believe, Captain? A respected businessman? Or a drifter with Apache blood on his hands?" Sheriff Wilson stepped between them, his hands raised. "This isn't the place for this. Mr. Larson, I'm asking you and your men to disperse." "I don't think so, Sheriff," Larson said softly. His right hand drifted toward his coat pocket. Boone saw it. His own hand hovered over his Colt. The air crackled. The entire town held its breath. Then it happened. Larson's hand came out of his pocket, but it wasn't holding a gun. It was holding a folded piece of paper. As he started to dramatically unfurl it, a shot rang out. Not from Boone, not from Larson. From the balcony of the hotel across the street, the bullet kicked up dust at Larson's feet, and the street exploded into chaos. Larson's men opened fire, their bullets tearing into the storefronts. Boone grabbed Ayana, pulling her behind a water trough as splinters flew around them. Through the haze of gun smoke, he saw Larson scrambling for the safety of his bank, still clutching that piece of paper. Whatever was on that paper, it was important enough to die for. "Stay here," Boone yelled to Ayana, pressing his spare Remington into her hands. "The debt remains," she said, her eyes intense. "If you die, the balance shifts." "Then I won't die," he said grimly, and sprinted for the alleyway beside the bank. He slipped through a side window. He could hear Larson inside, frantically working the combination on his safe. Boone moved silently to the office door. Larson had the safe open and was stuffing documents and bags of gold dust into a satchel. "Going somewhere, Larson?" Boone asked, stepping into the room, his revolver leveled. Larson froze. Then he turned, a cold smile on his face. "Delaney, I should have known." He patted the satchel. "The deed to the Sacred Hills. Assay reports confirming the richest gold vein in the territory, and enough money to start over." "It's over," Boone repeated. "Is it?" Larson asked smoothly. "You might want to see the document I was about to show the town." He held up the paper from his pocket. "Your father's confession, written in his own hand, admitting to the sale of Apache land. A forgery, of course. But who will question it when you're dead?" His eyes gleamed with malice. "History is written by the survivors, Captain." "Then it's time to set the record straight," Boone said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Before you do that," Larson said, his smile turning predatory, "you should know what else is in this satchel. Deeds to half the businesses in town, mortgages on every farm, evidence implicating the sheriff, the judge. I didn't build my empire alone, Captain. Kill me, and you don't just kill one man. You destroy this entire community." Boone hesitated. It was a choice between justice and chaos. Before he could decide, a new voice spoke from the doorway, soft but unwavering. "There is another way." It was Ayana. She stood in the doorway, the Remington held loosely at her side. "The debt can be paid," she said, her eyes fixed on Larson. "Truth for truth. Life for life. It has always been between three bloodlines: Delaney, Santos, and Larson." The banker's face went white. "What did you say?" "Maria Santos," Ayana continued, stepping into the room. The woman who should have died in the river. The woman whose daughter married a prospector named James Larson. Your father. The revelation hit Boone like a physical blow. What? Lies! Larson hissed, his composure finally shattering. Your father abandoned her when he found out about her Apache blood, Ayanna pressed on. But you always knew the truth, didn't you? You are of the same blood as I. The debt flows through your veins. That is why you want the gold, not just for wealth, but to destroy all evidence of what you are. Boone stared between them, his mind reeling. You're cousins. We are not family, Larson roared, his hand diving into the satchel and coming out with a tiny, deadly derringer. He swung the pistol toward Ayanna. Boone lunged, knocking the gun aside as it fired. The two men crashed against a desk, grappling for the weapons. The derringer fired again, the bullet searing a path of white-hot pain along Boone's side. Larson broke free, scooping up Boone's dropped Colt. He now had both guns. Family, he snarled, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. The Apache are animals. I've spent my life erasing that stain from my bloodline. He leveled the Colt at Boone's chest. And I won't let a half-breed witch and a traitor stop me now. Your secret dies with us? Boone gasped, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. My secret? Larson laughed, a broken sound. Silver Creek is built on secrets. Did your Apache shadow tell you about her father's role in your family's death? How Joseph Running Bear provided the very weapons used to kill your father? Boone's gaze flickered to Ayanna. He armed them, Larson spat. Pointed them right at your ranch, then conveniently arrived too late to stop it. Ask yourself, Captain, if he truly wanted to warn your father, why not send a messenger? Doubt, cold and unwelcome, crept into Boone's mind. He speaks with a serpent's tongue, Ayanna said, her voice steady. My father made mistakes, but he did not betray yours. Enough of this! Larson screamed, his face a mask of insane rage. He raised the Colt, aiming it squarely at Boone's heart. Goodbye, Captain. The gunshot was deafening in the small room. Boone flinched, bracing for the impact, but the bullet never came. Larson staggered backward, a look of shocked disbelief on his face. A dark stain spread across his expensive suit coat. The Colt clattered to the floor. In the doorway, holding a smoking revolver, stood Sheriff Wilson. That's enough, Henrik, the lawman said grimly. I've heard everything I need to hear. The town was in chaos, but Boone felt a strange sense of calm. He sat in the doctor's office, a fresh bandage tight around his side. The bullet had passed clean through. He was lucky. Henrik Larson was lucky too. He was alive. Wilson's bullet having missed his heart by an inch. He would live to stand trial. Ayanna was waiting on the porch. The silent vigil was over, but a new unspoken tension hung between them. We need to talk, Boone said, joining her. About what Larson said. About your father. My father made mistakes, she acknowledged, her face unreadable. As has yours, as have you. But the debt remains. This debt, Boone said, weariness settling deep in his bones, it seems to have caused nothing but suffering. A debt unpaid always brings suffering, she agreed. That is why it must be balanced. How? One of us still has to die? For the first time, he saw the ghost of a smile on her lips. There is another way, a ritual as old as the debt itself, the ceremony of speaking waters. Before he could ask what that meant, a group of riders appeared at the end of the street. Not soldiers, Apache warriors, and at their head was Joseph Running Bear. Townsfolk scattered, reaching for their guns. Sheriff Wilson stepped out of his office, his face grim. This could go badly, Boone muttered. The moment of truth has come, Ayanna said, her expression grave. Joseph and his warriors were not painted for war. They carried ceremonial staffs, not rifles. They came in peace. We have come to offer testimony against Henrik Larson, Joseph announced, his voice carrying through the tense street. He held up a leather pouch. Documents, plans for the mine, letters between Larson and corrupt government officials, proof of his crimes. He handed the pouch to Sheriff Wilson. Boone faced him directly. Larson said you armed the men who killed my father. Is it true? The entire town seemed to hold its breath. I gave rifles to young men to hunt, Joseph said, his voice heavy with the weight of the truth. To feed their families. I did not know Larson would poison their minds and use them as tools for his revenge. That is my burden to bear, and my part of the debt that must be balanced. Just then, Eleanor Patterson made her way through the crowd, leaning on her polished cane. "Sheriff," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Captain Delaney, the ritual they speak of is real. I witnessed it once before, many years ago, when your grandfather sought to make peace after saving Maria from the river." She looked straight at Boone. "It offers a path to truth that courts and jails cannot provide, but it requires a great sacrifice." Sheriff Wilson, looking utterly defeated by the strangeness of it all, just shook his head. "This is beyond me. Just keep it peaceful." As the sheriff left, Eleanor stepped closer to Boone. "Henrik will not be silenced by a jail cell," she whispered. "His poison runs too deep in this town. The ceremony may be your only chance to settle all accounts. For good." "When?" Boone asked Joseph. "Tomorrow at dawn," the medicine man replied, "at the place of Speaking Waters." "And Henrik?" Boone pressed. "He's part of this debt too." Joseph's expression was grim. "He must face the waters as well. His blood is bound to ours whether he acknowledges it or not." "He's under guard at the doctor's office," Boone said. "Wilson won't just let us take him." Eleanor's lips curved into a sly smile. "Leave that to me, Captain. Some doors in Silver Creek only open to certain keys, and I've collected quite a few over the years." As they prepared for the mysterious ceremony, Boone walked with Ayanna toward the edge of town. The 30-pace distance between them was gone, replaced by something new and uncertain. "You knew this would happen," he said. "From the moment I pulled you from the creek, you knew." "I knew what might be," she corrected softly. "The river shows many paths, but we choose which to follow." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Tomorrow at dawn, he would face a ritual that could heal decades of hatred or end in his death. And at the center of it all would be Henrik Larson, a wounded, cornered animal, a man who shared his blood, and a man who wanted him dead. The Speaking Waters were waiting. The plan was audacious. Eleanor Patterson, feigning a heart palpitation, distracted the doctor and the deputy guarding Henrik's room. It was all the opening Boone needed. He slipped into the back room. Henrik lay on a cot, pale and sweating, but his eyes were alert and filled with hate. "Come to finish the job, Delaney?" he rasped. "I'm here about tomorrow," Boone said. "The ceremony of Speaking Waters." A raw, visceral fear flashed across Henrik's face. "Apache superstition." "Maybe," Boone said, "but Eleanor Patterson seems to think it matters. She was there, you know, with my grandfather, and Maria Santos." "That woman means nothing to me," Henrik hissed. "She was your grandmother," Boone pressed. "Ayanna is your cousin." "Lies!" Boone studied the broken man. "Why, Henrik? Why all of it? The lies, the murders. Why?" For a long moment, Henrik was silent. Then the story poured out of him, a torrent of poison held back for a lifetime. He spoke of his mother, Maria's daughter, and the shameful secret of her Apache blood. He spoke of being mocked as a child, of joining the Confederacy to prove his purity, of a self-hatred so deep it had curdled into a genocidal rage. "I came here to destroy every trace of my heritage," he confessed, his voice a broken whisper. "The gold was just a means to an end, a way to erase the past. Your father discovered the truth. He found old letters. He confronted me. So you had him killed. I merely provided the tools to those already burning with hatred," Henrik sneered. "Poetic justice, don't you think? The savages in my blood became the instrument of my revenge." Just then the door opened. Eleanor stood there, her frailty gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "It's time, Captain." Joseph and two Apache warriors entered the room. They lifted Henrik, who was too weak to struggle, onto a stretcher. "This is kidnapping," Henrik hissed. "The army will hunt you down." "By the time they learn of it," Eleanor said calmly, "the truth will have been spoken to the waters. All of it." They traveled through the night, a strange procession carrying a wounded villain to a sacred rite. "What exactly happens at this ceremony?" Boone asked Ayanna as they rode. "The Speaking Waters reveal truth," she said, her voice low. "All truth, For those who have built their lives on lies, it can destroy everything. She paused. The waters will also show you things about Ezra and Maria, things you do not know. They were lovers, Boone guessed. And more, she replied, her words dropping like stones into the darkness. Maria's daughter, Henrik's mother, was also Ezra's daughter. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Then Henrik, he's not just your cousin, he's my cousin too. We are all bound by blood, Ayana confirmed, and by the debt of interference. They arrived at the sacred pool. Torches cast flickering shadows on the ancient petroglyphs. Joseph began the preparations, painting symbols on their foreheads, dressing them in simple white garments. Henrik refused. I will not wear Apache rags. These are not Apache garments, Joseph said, his voice filled with a strange compassion, using Henrik's Apache birth name. They are older, Henrik, from a time before our peoples were divided. The name seemed to stun Henrik into silence. Then came the final preparation, a clay bowl filled with a dark, bitter liquid. Peyote, Eleanor explained, seeing the look on Boone's face. It opens the mind to the voice of the waters. It will show you truths you are not ready to face. Surrendering control went against every instinct Boone had, but he drank. So did Ayana and Eleanor. Henrik refused again. As the medicine took hold, the world began to shift. The rushing of the creek sounded like whispers. The carvings on the rock seemed to breathe. Joseph placed them around the stone spiral. As the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, he raised his arms. The truths have been spoken, he intoned. Now comes the balancing. He looked at Boone and Ayana. The debt requires a life saved to be matched by a life saved, or a life surrendered. Step into the waters together. What happens next is in their hands. Boone looked at Ayana. This was it, the final payment. He took her hand, and together they stepped into the freezing water. The bottom dropped away. They were pulled under into the darkness. He felt Ayana thrashing beside him, not swimming, but struggling, being dragged down by a powerful undertow. The pool had become a trap. The waters were demanding their price. His lungs burned, but he kicked toward her, wrapping his arm around her waist. He fought the current, pulling them both toward a surface he could no longer see. A strange light glowed from the depths below them. In the light, faces swirled. Ezra, Maria, generations of ancestors. A voice spoke in his mind, ancient and powerful. The cycle repeats. Interference begets interference. What will you choose, son of Ezra? He understood then. It wasn't just about saving her. It was about choosing to perpetuate the cycle or break it. With the last of his strength, he kicked for the surface, his choice made. Not from debt, but from a simple, shared humanity. They broke the surface, gasping, under a sky that had turned from dawn to twilight. Hours had passed. Joseph stood on the bank, a look of awe on his face. It is done, he said. The debt is balanced. How? Boone gasped. I saved her. Again. It was not about the saving, Joseph explained, a smile finally breaking through his stoic expression. It was about the choice. Ezra acted out of compassion without knowing the consequences. You acted with full knowledge of the weight of the debt and chose compassion anyway. You have broken the cycle by embracing it. From his palate, Henrik gave a weak, broken laugh. His eyes were wide and haunted. The waters had shown him a truth his mind couldn't handle. As Eleanor draped blankets over them, Ayana looked at Boone. The 30 paces are no more, she said softly. I am free to choose my own distance now. A peace settled over Boone, a sense of rightness he hadn't felt in years. The debt was paid. The cycle was broken, until Henrik's pained voice cut through the quiet. You fools, he rasped, a triumphant gleam in his haunted eyes. You think this ends here? The army patrol I summoned will be here by dawn, with orders to arrest the renegades responsible for this. His laugh was a rattling, terrible sound. The waters may have spoken, Captain, but gunpowder speaks louder. The army arrived right on schedule. A fresh-faced lieutenant, full of spit and polish, and a dozen nervous troopers. Captain Boone Delaney, 5th Cavalry, retired. Boone announced himself from the rocks above, his voice carrying the weight of command. "I need to speak with you about your orders, Lieutenant." He explained the situation, the kidnapping, Larson's crimes. The lieutenant was skeptical, his orders clear. "Apprehend the hostiles." But then Eleanor Patterson appeared. In her proper dress, widow of the most respected judge in the territory, she was a force of nature the young officer was not prepared for. She presented documents, evidence of Larson's corruption, and hinted at a conspiracy that went all the way to Fort Laramie. Then she played her trump card. "Sheriff Wilson has already telegraphed Colonel James Forsythe at department headquarters," she said coolly. "I expect a response will be waiting for you." It was a masterful bluff. By invoking a superior officer, she gave the lieutenant the cover he needed to pause without disobeying a direct order. Just then, Sheriff Wilson himself rode up, with Joseph at his side. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "It gets worse," the sheriff said grimly. "Larson also wired General Crook directly, claiming a full-scale Apache uprising. But Eleanor's foresight had been more potent than Larson's lies." The sheriff held up a second telegram, this one from Colonel Forsythe himself. "Regarding Henrik Larson, stop. All allegation suspect, stop. Subject under investigation for fraud, stop. Detain if possible. Take no military action, stop." Boone stared at Eleanor in disbelief. "My late husband and the colonel were old friends," she explained with a small smile. "The judge had been collecting evidence against Henrik for years. I simply forwarded it to the colonel 3 months ago. Justice, it turned out, sometimes required patience, and a well-placed friend in high command. Henrik Larson was taken into custody, not as a victim, but as a federal prisoner. The speaking waters had broken his mind. The law would now take his freedom. His empire of secrets had crumbled. 3 months later, the first snows of winter were dusting the mountains. The ranch was rebuilt, a joint effort by the people of Silver Creek and Joseph's band, a new and fragile peace settling over the valley. Sheriff Wilson rode out with news. The federal government was formally marking the boundaries of the Apache sacred lands, protecting them for good. And a letter had arrived from Boone's brother in Boston. His son William, now 16, wanted to come for a visit in the spring. The news hit Boone harder than any bullet. A son he barely knew, a ghost from a life he'd left behind. What would this boy, raised a gentleman, think of his rough-hewn father, of this wild land and its complicated history? As twilight fell, another rider approached. It was Ayanna. The blanket she wore against the cold couldn't hide the warmth in her eyes. The distance between them was no longer measured in paces, but in unspoken possibilities. Boone told her about his son, about his fear. "He will find a man who has faced his past and chosen a different future," she said simply. "That is no small legacy to offer a son." Her words settled a fear in him he hadn't even known how to name. But there was one last piece of the story. "Eleanor found more of my grandfather's letters," he began slowly. "Correspondence with Maria Santos after she returned to her people." He took a breath. "In one of them, Maria says her daughter, Henrik's mother, wasn't Ezra's child after all. She was already with child when Ezra pulled her from the river. The father was an Apache warrior." The final twist settled between them. The blood connection that had defined the debt, that had driven Henrik's madness, had been a lie. A misunderstanding, perpetuated for generations. "Then Henrik is not your blood relation," Ayanna said slowly. "And neither am I." "Not by blood," Boone agreed, a slow smile spreading across his face as he looked at this incredible woman. "But we are bound by something else now. Not the past, but the future we choose to create." The first snowflakes of winter began to fall, dusting the valley in a clean, white blanket. Boone looked out at the land that was finally truly his. He had a ranch to run, a community to help heal, and a son to meet. The real boundary was never between his people and hers. It was between the past they couldn't change and the future they were about to build together. If you enjoyed this story of justice on the frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales from the edge of the map.